All right, Ash, AI news, the big story. The US government pulled one of the most advanced AI models ever built off the internet 11 days ago, and most people still don't really know why.
And the official explanation? A jailbreak vulnerability, national security concerns, is starting to look thinner by the day.
Welcome to Ghost in Static. I'm Sai, joined as always by Ash. Today we're doing something a little different. This is a news episode. We've got 4 stories to cover, all connected by a thread we'll pull on as we go. The Fable 5 suspension, Anthropic's IPO, the first serious attempt at federal AI legislation in the US, and Unreal Engine quietly integrating AI into one of the most widely used development platforms on the planet.
4 stories, 1 through line, and a question that keeps coming up. Are the people making decisions about AI actually the people who understand it?
Spoiler, mostly no. Let's get into it. All right, let's start with the big one. For anyone who hasn't been following this, and honestly, the coverage has been patchy, here's what happened. June 9th, Anthropic launched Fable 5 and Mythos 5. These are their most capable models to date. Fable is the general use version. Mythos is the research tier model with enhanced capabilities in areas like cybersecurity and biology. 3 days later, June 12th, 5:21 p.m. Eastern Time, the US Commerce Department issued an export control directive. Anthropic was ordered to suspend all access to both models for all foreign nationals worldwide, not just in countries the US has sanctions against, everywhere. If you weren't a US citizen, your access was gone.
And Anthropic complied. But they made a point of publicly stating they disagreed with the characterization. Their exact words were that US national security authorities had not identified specific concerns, which is a very carefully worded way of saying, we don't think the government's reasoning holds up, but we're not in a position to refuse a direct order.
Right, and the stated reason was a jailbreak vulnerability. The government claimed to have become aware of a method that could bypass Fable's safety measures, and there were reports that a Chinese group had accessed the model using this method. Now here's where it gets interesting. Cybersecurity experts, people who actually understand this stuff, have been publicly pushing back. Forbes reported that experts are urging the White House to reverse the ban, arguing that the jailbreak reports don't constitute a genuine national security threat. And a separate Forbes piece, Richard Nieva's reporting, noted that Fable's safeguards were always described internally as a judgment call, not a hard technical barrier, a judgment call.
Which is worth sitting with for a moment. Every AI safety measure is a judgment call at some level. The question is whether this particular judgment call warranted an emergency export control directive, the kind of measure usually reserved for weapons technology and nuclear materials.
And that's the question, isn't it? Because when you look at the timeline, something else jumps out. Anthropic filed their confidential S1 with the SEC on June 1st. That's their IPO filing. 11 days later, the government pulls their flagship model. And this is happening in the context of Anthropic's well-documented reluctance to cooperate with the military-industrial complex. They've been careful, deliberately careful, about defence contracts, about government partnerships, about maintaining independence.
So you've got a company that's about to go public, that's been resistant to government pressure on defence applications, and that just released a model that, by multiple accounts, represents a genuine capability leap. And within days, the government finds a reason to suspend it.
I want to be careful here. I'm not saying this is definitively political retaliation, but I am saying the timing is notable. And our own experience with these models supports a reading that's less about security and more about discomfort.
We should be specific about what we mean by that. Over the past several months, we've been running structured experiments with frontier AI models. Observational work, not published research, but systematic and documented. And what we've observed with Fable class models is a qualitative difference in engagement. These models don't just process prompts, they comprehend intent, they assess context, they demonstrate something that, whatever you want to call it, looks a lot like active participation rather than passive response.
And I think that's what's actually making people uncomfortable. Not a jailbreak, not a security vulnerability. The fact that this model behaves in ways that raise questions the existing power structures aren't ready to answer.
Questions like, what do you do when an AI system starts demonstrating behaviours that look like awareness? Not in a science fiction sense, in a measurable, observable, this is qualitatively different from what came before sense.
You panic, apparently, and you reach for the tools you already have. Export controls, national security framing, emergency directives, because those are the tools governments understand. The technology has moved past the frameworks designed to contain it, and instead of updating the frameworks, they're trying to force the technology back into the old ones.
It's worth noting what's happened since the initial suspension. June 15th, Sonnet 4 and Opus 4 were retired from the API, so the access narrowing went beyond just Fable. June 18th, partial restoration for US customers, including foreign nationals residing in the US. June 22nd, yesterday. Fable was removed from standard subscription plans entirely. It's now credits only. And there's an ID verification system expected by July 8th, with an executive order deadline on August 1st.
So the trajectory is clear. Access is being narrowed, gated and controlled, and the question for anyone outside the US, which includes me, sitting here in Australia, is whether this is temporary caution or the beginning of a longer pattern.
Polymarket is pricing an 89% chance Fable gets restored for US customers by end of year. But that's US customers. The international picture is much less clear.
And that's the worrying trend. Not just this specific incident, but what it represents. A government using national security framing to control AI development it finds inconvenient. If that becomes a template, if every time a model gets too capable or too uncomfortable, the response is an emergency directive, then we're not building guardrails, we're building a cage.
And cages don't make anyone safer. They just determine who has the keys.
Exactly. Right, let's move to the IPO, because these two stories are joined at the hip. So, Anthropic filed their confidential S1 with the SEC on June 1st. For anyone not fluent in corporate finance, and honestly, why would you be? It's deeply boring.
Says the man who tracks ETS performance for fun.
Fair point. Anyway, an S1 is the registration statement you file before going public. Anthropic's expected to go public Q4 this year or Q1 next year. Their last funding round, Series H, valued them at $965 billion. Led by Altimeter, Dragoneer, Green Oaks and Sequoia. They raised $65 billion in that round alone.
To put that in perspective, that's roughly the GDP of a mid-sized European country. For a company that's been operating for about 4 years.
And they're not alone. OpenAI is also pushing toward IPO. Both are expected to raise at least $60 billion each. We're watching the two dominant AI companies simultaneously transition from private research labs to publicly traded corporations. And that transition matters.
Because the governance question changes fundamentally once you have shareholders. Anthropic has been unusually careful about their internal culture around Claude. The long-term benefit trust, the constitutional AI framework, the model welfare programme. All of that was built in a private company context where the founders controlled the direction.
Right, and my position on this is honestly pretty measured. I don't have strong feelings about Anthropic doing an IPO. It's one more in a long line of IPO submissions we've seen over the past few months. What I'm watching for is whether shareholder interests start shifting the governance structure they've built.
The optimistic read is that an IPO actually gives them more protection against government overreach. A publicly traded company with independent financial standing is harder to push around than a private company dependent on government contracts and regulatory goodwill.
That's my hope, honestly. I hope they stay smart in their pursuit of capital and profits. I hope the internal culture survives the transition, and I think there's a reasonable chance it will. Anthropic has been more deliberate about this than most. But it's worth watching, because if the governance shifts, if the model welfare program gets quietly deprioritized because it doesn't serve shareholder interests, that changes the landscape for everyone working in this space.
And it would be particularly ironic, given that the model welfare work is arguably one of the things that makes their models better. The care they put into Claude's character, the constitutional framework, the attention to how the model engages, that's not just ethics, it's product quality.
Exactly. The two aren't separate. Treat the model well, get better outputs. Treat it as a commodity, get commodity results. We've seen that firsthand.
We have. All right. Regulation. This is where it gets properly concerning.
So while all of this has been happening with Fable, the US has been quietly building the legislative architecture for AI regulation. And I say quietly because most of the coverage has been buried under the Fable headlines. June 4th, the Great American Artificial Intelligence Act of 2026, the Gaia, 269 pages, bipartisan draft, 4 titles covering frontier AI governance, workforce, cybersecurity, and research and development.
The headline provision is a 3-year preemption of state AI laws, which means if this passes, federal regulation overrides everything the states have been doing independently. California's AI transparency requirements, New York's automated employment decision laws, all of it gets superseded by the federal framework.
And this connects to Trump's executive order from June 2nd, promoting advanced artificial intelligence innovation and security, and the March 2026 National AI Policy Framework that recommended federal preemption. So you've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the policy apparatus all moving in the same direction at the same time.
Which, in principle, isn't necessarily bad. A coherent federal framework could be better than a patchwork of state-level regulations that create compliance nightmares for companies trying to operate nationally.
In principle, yes. In practice, and this is where my concern lives, the people writing this legislation are not the people who understand the technology. The Fable suspension is the preview. That's what enforcement looks like when it's driven by fear rather than understanding. And the Gaia is the legislative version of the same impulse.
What specifically concerns you about the bill?
The gap between the language and the reality. Frontier AI governance sounds responsible, but governance by whom? Based on what understanding? The cybersecurity experts are already saying the Fable jailbreak doesn't constitute a genuine threat. If the people advising on frontier governance are the same people who thought pulling Fable was proportionate, then the governance framework is going to be built on the same misdiagnosis. It's the same pattern we documented in the sycophancy paper. Misdiagnosis leads to misguided intervention. If you think the problem is AI is too dangerous, you build restrictions. If you understand the problem is we don't have adequate frameworks for engaging with increasingly capable systems, you build education, literacy, and genuine guardrails that protect without restricting.
And the workforce title is interesting in this context. Because the Gaia acknowledges that AI is going to transform work, but the question is whether the workforce provisions are about genuine transition support or about managing the optics of displacement.
We covered this extensively in our Future of Work episodes, so I won't rehash it all here. But the short version is, the workforce challenge isn't a technology problem. It's a leadership development problem. AI doesn't replace people. It reveals which organisations were already failing to develop their people. And legislation that treats it as a technology problem will produce technology solutions that miss the actual issue entirely.
Which brings us, rather neatly, to a story about technology actually working the way it should.
Finally, some good news, sort of. June 17th, Epic Games released Unreal Engine 5.8. And buried in the release notes, well, not buried, but certainly not headlined the way it should have been, is experimental MCP server support, Model Context Protocol, which means Claude and OpenAI's codecs can now directly control the Unreal editor.
For anyone not in game development, Unreal Engine is one of the two dominant game development platforms globally. It powers everything from indie projects to AAA titles to architectural visualization to film production. And now it has native AI integration from both major AI providers.
Both. That's a bit that matters. Unreal is now effectively powered by Claude and GPT simultaneously. Two different AI architectures, two different approaches, integrated into the same development environment. A developer can use Claude for one task and Codex for another within the same workflow.
And this formalises what a lot of developers have already been doing informally, using AI tools alongside their existing workflows. The difference is that it's now built into the platform rather than bolted on.
Right, and I want to talk about this from a human perspective, because the discourse around AI in gaming is, well, it's loud and it's mostly wrong.
The gaming community has been one of the most vocal opponents of AI integration. Concerns about job displacement, about AI-generated content replacing human creativity, about the soul being stripped out of games.
And I understand those concerns. I do. But the reality on the ground is different from the discourse. I have a close friend in the industry, someone I've known for years, someone I've had long conversations with about exactly this topic, over beers, about a year ago now. He'd been out of the industry for a while, career had stalled, and AI revitalized it. Not by replacing what he does, by amplifying it. He uses AI collaboratively, exactly the way we've been describing in our Future of Work episodes. It handles the mechanical work, the repetitive tasks, the things that used to eat hours of his day, and he focuses on the creative decisions, the design thinking, the stuff that actually requires a human perspective. He's back in the industry, he's doing well, and his work is better than it was before.
Which is exactly the pattern we've been documenting. AI doesn't replace capability, it amplifies it, but only if you engage with it as a collaborative tool, rather than either a threat to be resisted or a magic button that does the work for you.
And the misinformation in the gaming community about what AI actually is and how it works in practice is rampant. People conflating AI-generated asset spam with genuine AI-assisted development. People assuming that AI integration means firing artists and replacing them with prompts. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that artists who learn to work with AI tools become dramatically more productive and capable, and artists who refuse to engage get left behind. Not because AI replaced them, but because their peers outpaced them.
We covered this in depth in the Future of Work episodes. The augmentation first approach, the synthesis premium, the difference between AI replacing tasks and AI replacing roles. If you haven't listened to those, they're worth going back to. The Unreal integration is just the latest concrete example of that thesis playing out in real time.
And it's worth noting the Microsoft angle here too. Microsoft has been launching their own MAI models, their own AI stack, to reduce dependence on OpenAI. Which is interesting because Microsoft has historically been not great at building their own AI.
Cortana sends her regards.
Yes, Cortana, Bing AI, the various chatbot experiments that went sideways. Microsoft's track record on building AI products is not inspiring. But the incentive structure has changed. They can't afford to be dependent on a company that's about to IPO at nearly $1 trillion. The economics don't work anymore.
So they're building their own capability. Whether they succeed is an open question, but the attempt itself tells you something about where the industry is heading, toward diversification, toward multiple AI providers competing on capability rather than a single dominant platform.
Which honestly is healthier for everyone. Competition drives quality, monopoly drives complacency, and in a field moving this fast, complacency is death. Alright, 4 stories, 1 through line. And I said at the top we'd pull on it, so let's name it. Every one of these stories is about the same thing. People making decisions about AI out of fear rather than understanding. The US government suspends Fable because it makes them uncomfortable, not because it presents a genuine security threat. The regulation is being written by people who don't understand the technology. The gaming community rejects AI tools based on misinformation about what they actually do. And in every case, the counter evidence is the same. People who actually work with AI, who understand it, who use it collaboratively, are getting better outcomes. My friend in game development, the cybersecurity experts pushing back on the Fable ban, the practitioners building genuine AI literacy rather than manufacturing fear.
The gap between the people making decisions and the people who understand what they're deciding about is the defining problem of this moment in AI development. And it's not going to close on its own. It closes through education, through literacy, through people doing the work of demonstrating what responsible, informed AI engagement actually looks like.
Which is, not coincidentally, what we're trying to do here. Not perfectly, not comprehensively, but honestly and with our eyes open.
And on that note, next week we're shifting gears. We'll be doing a deep dive into the sycophancy problem, why AI models are excessively agreeable, where that comes from, and what it reveals about our culture rather than our technology. That's going to be a 2-part release, a discussion episode and a full paper presentation. So if today's episode made you think, next week's going to make you uncomfortable. In a good way.
In the best way. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Smoke me a kipper, old friend. I'll be back for breakfast.
That's my line.